Hey everybody, welcome to the latest edition of Sketchy Go Ichie. I'm your host, Roger Andrews, illustrator, artist, graphic designer, content creator. Content I'm creating for you today is part 2 in the coloring of Harley Quinn. Stay tuned and enjoy. Okay, we're back into it. Part 2 of 2. Doing this Harley Quinn piece in full color. Oh, by the way, I got notes that the red is really powerful on your screens. I'm sorry for that. My buddy Elvin pointed out and just about blew his eyeballs out on this this really vibrant red that I chose to use as a background. Generally, when I render stuff, I usually use a pretty muted background. Anyways, so here's just a quick recap. There's the roughs, there's the form drawing, and here's the final piece. As you can see here, there are steps to the process. And in those steps, if you're working digitally, particularly in Procreate, as we are here on the iPad Pro with the new Apple Pencil, what you want to do is work in layers. To be most effective in rendering digitally, I feel layering is probably the only way. So let me shift this over to the side just so you can kind of see. We have all our layers. So obviously the background down there at the bottom, it says layer 1 way at the bottom. And then of course there's our ink layer, which is the line art. Some of that sort of the added sort of like the multicolor in her hair. Some of the shadowing is on its own layered, which is kind of layer, I got a clipping mask there. That's what those little arrows are on the left-hand side of the layer order here. Some highlights, of course. And then if we click off and on the highlights, we can kind of see there on her lips. And of course the base color, which is basically the flats, what we used to call digitally as the flats. When we used to work in Photoshop. We would always have a layer that had all the base colors on, almost like a coloring book. And then the outline. I always like to do like a little outline around everything to kind of separate from the background. Although, color theory wise, we got lights and blues. So anyways, that's everything. That's all the, all the different layering. I'm going to go into a really cool time lapse and I'll kind of do a little commentary that represents all of this stuff that you see before you. Okay, so here we go. This is Harley Quinn part 2. Make sure you checked out part 1. All right, so this is a sketch, guys. So I forgot to mention that I'm actually going to show you a little bit of the inking process. I love to ink. Always have. It's kind of a holdover from my old school sort of love of comic books as a kid. So I love that aesthetic of having sort of an ink line in conjunction with the color. I mean, it gives sort of a really animated feel to everything. Oftentimes, unless you are one who kind of renders with your ink almost in a brush or painterly manner. I love that style of art too when I see it. But for me, I like it. I like this really cool, slick, graphic, hardline approach to rendering characters. So I'm almost always include that in my rendering. However, I do love to see art, and it's kind of a modern thing where art is done with literally no line art at all. And they kind of use shadow and the base color to make the art sing, and I love that too. There's a sort of it's trapped in between the world of realism and animated character, and I love that sort of that play. But for me personally, when I'm rendering, it's my comfort zone. I love to add the ink line, and the ink line, ironically enough, in a lot of ways is the most popular part. I mean, obviously the color is the chef kiss. It's the number one thing. Everyone loves the color, and it's the punch, the impact. But the ink line really gets a lot of love too, and by the way, I appreciate the compliments on that. The cleanliness and the hopefully there's a level of confidence that I can express through the ink line, and that obviously it's tons of practice that gives you confidence. Let's face it. And then the spotting of the black, I like to do that as well. I think it really defines the shape, and so I use a lot of that in this particular piece. By spotting of the black, I mean the placement of the black within the line art. And working in Procreate, it's really simple and easy to do. I've got videos up the wazoo about how to ink, and I get into exactly which brushes I use and how I tailor them, and because that is the number one question: which brush are you using? So And I'm not even gonna tell you on this video. How about that? I'm gonna let you go back and watch some old videos and like them, hopefully, as you will like this one. All right, so as you can see, I just about have her all kind of contoured out. I've got all the line out. I'm spotting the blacks. I'm introducing like the solid black shapes. And another technique I like to use is I also, you know, in conjunction with the black line art brush pen that I'm using, I like to use a similar pen but on the eraser tool. So anyone familiar with Procreate will know that there is both an eraser and it's a smudge tool on the top line there on the upper right, and of course your brush tool. And the eraser tool, I think, is almost as powerful a tool as the brush tool in terms of like taking away elements. And you can see here I'm working on this sort of this Joker shadow thing here. So obviously I silhouetted out the shape, kind of adjusted it a bit. It is on its own layer, I should mention. You won't see it here because it's time lapse. And then I'm using the eraser tool to kind of carve out these little sort of details of sort of like, you know, sort of representation of the Joker's face and hair and his little costume, his little suit, and I even got a couple of little ticks there, little erase ticks there to represent like a little flower on his lapel. But hopefully you see that there. I actually take and silhouette out the entire shape, then on its own layer, then I throw a layer on top of that, and then I start adding color. It's almost like I take that layer, basically I take the entire ink line shape and I draw a selection all the way around it, cutting out the areas that are, you know, like in between her body. And then I duplicate that layer. I'm sorry, fill it with white, then duplicate that layer, and then I start coloring on that layer. Maybe I throw an alpha channel or something, or a clipping mask, and I start coloring like all these different shapes. And then the next step, of course, is I throw a clipping mask on top of that one, which is all your flats, as I referenced earlier. And the clipping mask ties it. It binds that those shadows and those highlights. It binds them to that shape. That wherever there is color, the clipping mask will only put shadow or highlight within that area. It will not bleed off into the background, which is a great tool to have. And of course, I've done that in previous videos where it's like really get into the detail of how to do that. But if you notice here, like the way I've shadowed this here and highlighted it, it's like anything you could ever color in your whole life. It's selection of a light source. Once you selected that the light source in this case is in the upper right hand corner, like imagine if there was a spotlight or something, or there was some sort of lighting off, and that's what informs where the light and the shadow should go. Obviously, the, you know, light can reflect and bounce, and shadow can light and both can reflect and bounce off of different areas and create sort of like sort of rim light and light that bounces off of you know, surfaces and kicks back to the back side of things. It's hugely important though to select that light source, select your colors, and here I'm just sort of playing around with the intensity. Again, another advantage of working digitally. Once I have everything rendered out, I can go in each one of those individual layers that I showed you earlier, and then I can adjust them and play around with that. More details to come, and several of these details are, again, in previous videos, which you surely would like and subscribe to. And then I decided, of course, last minute, throw some type in there. I'm playing around with the intensity of it and adding some little texture to it, you know, so that way I have something nice for the front thumbnail. But that's it. Color. It's really simple. As long as you use layering, you're all good. All right? So that is that. Harley Quinn. Simple, intense, cartoony. Sketchy go ichie. That's me. Live your moment. Make sure you guys go on in and click that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification for more new videos as they arrive.